Okay. Now, first of all, sharing is caring. And I noticed, well, first of all, who has Twitter? Who has Twitter? Who has Facebook? You know, I am not seeing the pictures from Alfresco Day today. So there's my Twitter handle there. So I will tweet, and I'll recognize everyone who tweets something, unless you don't want me to. And so please do tweet if you like anything. If you hate or disagree with anything, I want you to tweet, and then I will respond, and we can have a conversation about it. But right now, we don't have that conversation on Twitter, so that would be really helpful. Okay, so I would like to talk a little bit about digital transformation, just like everybody else in this industry, right? And it's so nebulous. And when I look for some sort of definition or something that says, what is digital transformation? All I see is a bunch of like, well, if you want to do digital transformation, you have to do these things in terms of like hire the right people or do this sort of behavior, but nothing that actually says what digital transformation is. There's lots about the technology that's part of digital transformation, but that's not digital transformation. It's not technology. It's the use of technology. So why is it that we can't say what digital technology or what digital transformation is? I think it's because there's no way of expressing it. And I think patterns might be the way to do that. So back in 1977, I was a student at Berkeley. And I used to walk past this really ugly building, which actually happened to be the School of Architecture. And it's known as brutalism in architecture. It's a sort of inside-out building to show the students how the thing was actually constructed. It was also ugly. And one of the professors was trying to express how you can make architecture beautiful and also useful. And so he wrote this book around the time I was there, I had no idea, called A Pattern Language. And what it did was it more or less described patterns of architecture. And it was a very accessible book. He wrote it in such a way that any of us could really understand it. It talked about pathways, streets, marketplaces, and parts of buildings, and things like houses for young couples, how universities are actually marketplaces. It was talking about the patterns that could be reused over and over again. And it actually came at a really important time because that's when CAD software first started coming up, and it became the basis for a lot of the foundation of CAD and the buildings we live in today. Who knows, maybe no, I know this building was not. That was already there, but just down the street. May have been because of this book. Now, it was very influential. It was so influential that it became a way of describing how you develop software. Software is described since the 1950s as architecture, but there was nothing to really say how you wrote about architecture. There was no language. And so it turned out that this notion of patterns was a good way of describing it. So there's basic types of software patterns of creation, so things like factories and whatever, structures such as adapters and composites and facades, and different types of behavior as well. So this actually came out of a small talk, arguably one of the first object-oriented systems out of Xerox PARC. And notice that the way that the previous book was describing patterns as solutions to problems, it says it exactly the same way here in some of the early descriptions of patterns for software development. So it came from these guys here. The people on the left are the Gang of Four. No, not that Gang of Four. This is the Gang of Four that actually came up with all the fundamental patterns of software development. Who here is a software developer? Maybe about a quarter. But patterns are the way that you describe how you build software. So if you're not a software developer, when you see a really cool piece of software, you can say, what patterns did you use in creating that software? And you may actually sound like you know something. Now, so that's a gang of four, and they wrote the book on patterns. The guys on the right were actually very influential in taking the language of that architecture book and applying it to describing these software patterns and reusing it. And the guy on the left is Ward Cunningham, and he's still doing some of this stuff as well. He's still working on patterns and getting it out to other people. And when you describe these things, this is a simplified version of what you actually write down. It's designed to actually be able to put onto a card or something simple. Just put the name of the pattern, the purpose, the intent, what use cases it applies to, what's the motivation, why are we creating this pattern, this reusable bit of software? How is it applicable? What's the context in which you'd use it? What's the structure? What other classes does it use? What other objects? And how does it interact with other patterns as well? And then how is it implemented? Now, you want to document this thing, and this was before there was a web. So when there was a web, you need to create a website. And so Ward just looked at this and said, you know, this is really hard creating all this HTML. So this is like the mid-90s. So Ward and Kent Beck actually went and created something. And I'm pretty sure that they went to Hawaii before they did that, or one of them, probably Ward. And why would I know that? Well, I actually have a 35-year association with Hawaii. I went to high school there. And when you go to Honolulu, it's really nice to get off the airplane, but sometimes you have to walk a long way. And so you have this thing called the Wiki Bus. And wiki in Hawaiian means fast. And they use a lot of pidgin in Hawaii. And in pidgin, when you want to double something or make it very, very fast, you say Wiki Bus. And so they created the Wiki Web to actually create all these patterns and get it out to everybody so they can consume it on the web and be able to browse it and read it, and actually made it so that if you saw something, you could change it. Now, Ward said that in the early days, that when people wanted to change things, they would email him, he'd apply it, but he said, you know, you could do this yourself. And so this was the first wiki, the very first wiki, which in turn led to Wikipedia about 5 years later. And therefore, by simply creating these patterns and being able to put them out, they created a fundamental pattern themselves, the wiki pattern, and all sorts of component parts to the wiki, which ended up being perhaps one of the most significant digital transformations in human history, to take all the encyclopedias and all human knowledge and try to collect it in one place and make it accessible for everyone to be able to add their own knowledge. So that's pretty powerful. That's really useful. It just shows the power of patterns. And by making it open and making it, add more things, there are now thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of different design patterns. Now, there's no point in me going through all these design patterns whatsoever. Just, this is the way software is constructed. But it's a language for describing what is software. Now, if we're trying to solve a problem, what problem are we trying to solve? So this is some stats that we collected working with Forbes magazine a couple of years ago. I presented it in previous Alfresco days in London, but I think it's worthwhile because what it says is the fastest growing companies are looking for the following things out of digital transformation. Number one, make it easier for customers and citizens to do business with us. Number 2, make it easier for suppliers or partners to do business with us. Essentially the ecosystem. Connect the ecosystem. The outside and bring it inside. And then next is to simplify or modernize IT infrastructures and applications. Now, I am inferring that you do that because you're trying to do the first 2. Likewise, improve or streamline business processes. Could be internal, you might want to get efficiencies or whatever, but it's probably also for the first 2 as well. So if you want to be a fast-growing company, I can't say that this will make you a fast-growing company, but this, this is what fast-growing companies do with digital transformation. Okay, that still doesn't really describe what digital transformation is. So we came up with this diagram, and you saw that this morning when Tony presented it, which is digital operations is a way of acting on digital transformation by connecting the digital inside with the digital outside and connecting people and systems, and then building excellent experiences on top of that and make it really easy to be able to do that. Okay, there's a little more description of what digital transformation might be, but can you act on that? Not by itself, no, that's not enough, that's insufficient. So, we start to look at, okay, what's in these digital operations? Well, first of all, we want to simplify the user experience because we want to create excellent experiences. Let's make it easy to be able to create those and be able to connect the various digital systems together and the processes that link them together. There's also business processes as well. If you're trying to link all these different systems, then there's a business process that will connect them. And we want to integrate the systems that are inside the enterprise with external systems, perhaps a CRM system that may be running as a SaaS platform, or human capital management, or whatever might be involved in part of your digital transformation system. Remember, everybody is selling you part of digital transformation, so some of these are going to be part of your digital solution. Then build them all together as an integrated platform, because if you have a platform, that makes it much easier to build solutions on top. Likewise, whatever's underneath may be too old. Maybe it's time to renew or refresh that infrastructure. Remember, this is what fast-growing companies are doing as part of their digital transformation. So these are some of the things that you need to do. So what might be some of the patterns to actually be able to do these things? Okay, well, if you go and look at all the things that people are using Alfresco for, a lot of which is digital transformation, there's just way too many. How do you take and kind of deconstruct what's going on there? How do you describe what it is you're doing? I mean, there's so many things. Well, you have to slice and dice the thing and start to find what patterns. Okay, so first of all, is it focused on your digital inside? Is it focused on your digital outside? Also, is it focused on the customer? Is it focused on your products? Is it focused on people, organizations? So, just start to pull apart what are the core component pieces that are involved in this, and then see if there's anything in common between these different things. Any patterns in terms of behavior. So maybe you're doing something with 2 different types of objects, but it's a similar type of action or operation. So you've got to catalog all this and start to pull it apart. And when you do pull it apart, I think what's interesting is there's a few emerging use cases here. In terms of your digital inside, I find that collaborative tasks are becoming a very important theme, pattern, especially in government, where you task a team to do something, they have to collaborate in order to do it, they have an outcome, you measure the outcome. So there's a pattern involved in that. Also, there's like a new movement called Dematerialization, which is get rid of physical things. Just do everything digitally, remove material, and actually that saves a lot of money as well as making you more efficient. A lot of that is just getting rid of paper. It's the 21st century, people. It's time to get rid of paper. Intelligent cases are also really interesting, to not just pull together a case and content and process, but actually to do it intelligently. And then to do things like publishing and distribution of information. On the outside, onboarding, whether it's onboarding a customer, onboarding an employee, onboarding a team, all these things have some commonality. They have a pattern associated with it. So some examples of what that might be is to take the person, the company, the customer, and register them with other systems, to present them with information that they may need to be part of your process. So there's some patterns that emerge on things like that. Service requests that span multiple different systems. And this is interesting, customer empowerment. Having portals, having applications, having interfaces that allow a customer to do what they need within the constraints of security and everything else that may be required. There's some patterns involved in that, and exchanging information as well. Now, when you build these things, there's some components that you build on top of it. The original pattern languages had several layers associated with that. First of all, there's the presentation layer, which is how do you build the user interface? How do you pull together the user interface components? How do those interact with the system? How do they present information to the users? There's many different underlying patterns in the presentation. But things have changed since the original bits, and you see it with ADF. Design is an active part of the presentation paradigms and patterns. In fact, the design process itself is something that you may want to model or to come up with patterns on. The web front-end framework, using Angular as an example, and ADF itself to be able to take components and link components together, and to have an extended interface to be able to take and move with those. Then there's the domain model. A domain model is just another way of saying business logic. There, you have to deal with many different multiple domains. You have to have service layers and aggregation in ways that you simply didn't need to worry about, back when these patterns first came up. And paramount is compliance and security. That just gets tougher and tougher all the time. And in fact, with GDPR and things like that, there's a real fiscal implication to not doing that. Then there are many different data sources. Here, scale and distribution are just at levels that we had never considered before. Also, real time becomes a really important part of what we're doing, to be able to analyze in real time. And then the control and life cycle of that information. Before it was just like, well, I store it and it's there forever, right? No, there could be a life cycle where you need to destroy it or you need to nurture it over time. And something that wasn't considered originally is operations. DevOps is part of this process. DevOps has its own patterns, and in digital transformation may have some very special meanings as well. So originally, DevOps is just about code. Well, doesn't content have operations? Don't processes have operations? Yeah, they do. So there's lots of things you need to take into account, as well as new patterns of infrastructure as a code, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and cloud native. There's many different objects that have been familiar for the last 20 years. They take on new meanings, but they have patterns around that as well. For us, content is very, very important. Processes and tasks are very, very important. And then they will have various patterns on which these rely, that they inherit from the core capabilities here. And things like queries, new ways of looking at queries, but the core patterns remain the same. And then behaviors. There's new ways of looking at behaviors. In fact, some things like content as a service is not content services as a service, a content platform. Actually, the content itself can be a service. And the process as a service is not just a BPM engine that you can access. It could very well be a process such as order fulfillment as a service. So there's new ways of looking at behaviors. Also, automating things like automated compliance, to make sure that you do comply. Don't rely on people, rely on systems. So there's many different things you can look at here in terms of these patterns. Also, AI, if you look at it this way, it kind of gives you a sense not just that AI is cool, AI does, there's an application that is AI. It's patterns that get applied to your other patterns and get folded in and used. So things like content enrichment as a pattern or automated forms. So automated data entry, augmented user experience, decision making, and also more intelligent search to help you just say what it is you're looking for and actually getting the results that you intend. Now, no presentation on patterns would be complete without anti-patterns. Anti-patterns aren't like antimatter. Put an anti-pattern with the pattern and you get energy. No, anti-patterns are just bad, period. These are the things that you don't want to do. So things like you don't want a completely proprietary architecture. Open works better. Taking a paper forms-based process and making it exactly the same, but making it electronic. Those are bad things. Trust me, when you go into the Pentagon, you see a lot of those things. Monoliths, avoiding the cloud, these are some of the anti-patterns you'd find. And when you start to look at these patterns, it actually gives you a roadmap as to how you can start to build your solutions. You can have deployment patterns and how you deploy things. You can have domain and service patterns for things like process services, content services, governance services, insight services. CRM, ERP support could be part of the services that you need to aggregate. Then you have your web application patterns for how do you build the web application with the frameworks, core components, and any sort of domain-specific extensions. And then finally, the solutions themselves can be parts of patterns. Customer enrollment can be a pattern which gets reused over and over and over again. And then things related to that, resolution, manager approvals, things like that. So these can be useful. But you got to start somewhere. So how do you actually go and make these things really wiki-wiki? We want a wiki-wiki application, and we want to be really fast. So first of all, we need to create a language to make it easier so we can reuse things. If you reuse stuff, it's just so much faster. The very first part, especially if we want to discuss what is digital transformation, is to catalog common problems and solutions. Let's just get it down, okay? I would like to spend time starting to document exactly what digital transformation is in a very open way. We'll do this on GitHub, where we can all share in this, we can all participate in it. So any of you who are SIs, I would really like to see the patterns that you're seeing as part of this and how do they take and extend. So basically, use our open sourceness, use our openness, use open thinking to get this down. Let's work together on it. Let's work with the community, the partners, professional services. And then when we get this language, that becomes an important part of design thinking as well. So with design thinking, we can actually describe what it is. And we have a language that both visual and also descriptive that we can use as part of it. And then finally, let's develop this language of digital patterns together in the open. And thank you very much. And remember, it's @John Newton. Okay, thanks.